bogged down in this. Yeah, another interesting one is, Robert will really like this. This is also will be in the law, that users will get a request to get an interoperable and open source format copy of data processed. So this is another one that I think also industry has lobbied on quite a lot to, make that a bit less unconditional, because of course it's a big problem if you are a company that has a device that collects vast amounts of data in a proprietary format, and then the law says, yeah, well, you have to make sure that every user can export it in an interoperable and, well, I've made it open source, but that's something that the law seems to imply. It says a commonly used format. So, for example, what does that mean? Does it mean that you have to export in Excel or in PDF or in, OPML or ODF or, I can continue. So anyway, this is nothing to look forward to because it's going to be a big burden. And that's also a lot of, basically every company needs to have a mandatory privacy officer. If you're a small company and you don't have one, then somebody is going to make a promotion because you need a privacy officer. And then we have a lot of open ends that are still subject to implementation by delegated acts or implementing act. Well, if you're curious how that whole system works, I've just written an article on my blog about that with respect to the same system that's now being implemented in the medical devices regulation. That's a whole different world.
Does that depend on the type of device, the classification of the device, whether you have to have privacy or not?
No. This is general. It's a general data protection regulation, so everybody needs to have it. Even if you have a class 1 medical device. If it processes personal data, then you need to have a privacy officer. But of course, there's some good things out there that help you to define how to. Robert just raised some interesting questions on how do you start with data. For example, what data do I collect, for what purposes, and so on. There's a very good document. It's a bit of a reading test, but it's a document of the Article 29 Working Party number 202 on apps on smart devices. And that's a very good document. If you are designing an app, it's a very good guide on how to design for compliance. I've also written an article on my blog about it that basically translates this whole document into a table, even easier for your design documentation. This is also a good one, the Health Certification Program, Certification Standards of ATIC. It's intended for the US, but it's a document that basically asks a lot of questions. It has a sort of, what they try to do is to get universal certification criteria for health apps. But the questions that they pose on privacy, or the questions that they make you pose as part of your development process, are really useful. They're a bit like, they're the sort of the extended, more complex Disco version of the questions that Robert asked. So really relevant. Look at that. And then we'll go into software. What kind of documents are interesting here, and what will I discuss? Well, first of all, there's the, I think, the sort of basic document. If you are developing medical apps, you have to know this document, the MedDev 2.1/6 on standalone software. You have to basically be able to recite it backwards. I think I'm almost there. Very important, but this document is already under revision. What is going to happen to the document is still up for speculation. I often try to find out from the people in the software group at of the member states under the supervision of the commission that's working on it, what they're doing, and they tell me something different every time. And that shows that also member states think about it differently. Because if member states would be in complete agreement about what needed to be done, then the revisions would be easy. For example, I asked them, look, are you going to do something with the very problematic borderline between general health and wellness apps, like a lot of the quantified self apps, and it's also a distinction that Robert mentioned, and the strictly medical apps? Well, we don't know, because it's maybe more something for the medical devices expert group on borderline and classification, and it might go into their manual. Okay. But also the European Commission is working on a green paper that was supposed to have on exactly this borderline, which was supposed to have come out September, but is now definitely maybe scheduled still in 2013. But we don't know if we make that. I asked Tapani Piha, the guy that has a lot to do with that, and he says, well, I could tell you a lot, but then I wouldn't be allowed to do so. So anyway, then there's a lot of differences in interpretation between member states in what constitutes medical software. This is a nice document that was produced by the Swedish authorities, the Läkemedelsverket. It's a very nice, super elaborate document, but I think totally wrong on a number of points, because Swedes like to regulate everything which is used in a medical setting and has some degree of risk to it, which is, I think, not the right approach, but still Swedes consider it the right approach. So I would encourage you, read this for reference, but don't take it as the alpha and omega, because then you are probably going to be more strict on yourself than necessary. The new medical devices regulation that's currently also going to be voted on next week in Parliament in Strasbourg imposes some new additional essential requirements, or at least that's not what they're called anymore, but they're essential safety and performance requirements for mobile computing platforms and for software. So if you're into apps, then think about those. There is a very nice, frequently asked questions document on the EN 62304 standard, which is probably not known to a lot of people here, but once Hans is done with you, you will start being ambitious about being able to recite it backwards, because it will save a lot of time and money. And of course, there's also a problem with interoperability that Robert also raised, but that might actually be partly resolved by what's coming our way with data protection. Well, then for something completely useful, perhaps, because that's also what you're here for, to get a context of, so I'm going to develop an app, what do I have to do? Well, if you look at the MedDev document that I just mentioned, 2.1/6, what you need to do is basically follow this flowchart that's in the document, and there's a lot of letters around it that explain it in a lot more detail, but if you can do this, then basically you can decide whether your software is a medical device or not. So I'm just going to run through this with you quickly. So first you decide, is it a computer program? Well, there's a reference to a definition in the standard, but basically, to make it very simple, you have to ask yourself, does it run? Can it execute? So can you give it a run command, and then it executes the process, and then either it ends or not? Is it standalone? So is it, for example, can we use it on different platforms? Is it really baked into a specific medical device? Or is it something that is intended to function without necessarily being connected to that particular medical device?
Okay, I understand that it could be a function that stand alone. But as care and wellness and everything is so interconnected, I do believe that most of the solutions won't be intended as they stand alone.
Well, you get problems with distributed systems, for example, and then the question is, what in the end is the medical device? I think Hans can talk about that a bit more when you start doing connected systems. We've discussed intended purpose, And basically, as a manufacturer, you are allowed to define what your medical device is. This MedDev also says if you have something that's part of a bigger system, but only parts of that system, specific modules that are well defined, have medical functionality, then you can say, well, that is the medical device. It has some dependencies with other parts of the system which I define and validated, but I only certify this particular piece under the medical devices directive. That's something you see happen with electronic health record systems. You see these systems, they branch out and get all kinds of sort of additional functionality. Well, then you can say, look, the core of my system, that's not a medical device. Then I have some calculators and other stuff that are sort of on the border of it. And these are medical devices. These I certify. I validate the dependencies with the rest of the software. And then we've got some little devices in a bigger system. This is the most difficult question. You would think this is the most difficult one, is the intended purpose in the scope of the medical device directive. That's the other really difficult question, of course. This is really a problematic one because it's a negative definition. Does it something else than this? Does the action go beyond storage, archival, lossless compression, or simple search? So that's why I put in algorithms, for example, because algorithms usually go beyond simple search or archival and so on. Lossless compression is another important one because if you have pictures that you run, that you convert to a JPEG or something, that's a lossy compression format. So then you're already a medical device if they're medical pictures, something that people often forget. So basically here I usually use the criterion, does it do anything that's more than a little bit intelligent, or a little bit intelligent and then something more? Does it really add something to the intelligence of the doctor? Then, this is another interesting one, is it for the benefit of individual patients? Important because if it does something general for a general population, like for example say, if we look at this population, we see an incidence of this much heart failure, then that's not for the benefit of a particular patient. Well, we just looked at a medical device piece of software where we had to struggle with this question because what it did was it would calculate, it would give the doctor advice on what kind of antibiotics not to give to a patient with a suspected hospital infection based on the location of the patient in the hospital. Because what this software would do, it would look in a database that it had from the hospital, and then it could decide that basically if the patient is in that wing of the hospital, then he will probably have contracted a hospital infection of a bacteria that's resistant to these and these antibiotics. So don't give him that. And then we were wondering, yeah, but this is data that does not relate, it's not data that relates to the patient as such, but it does say something about that's input for the treatment of the patient. So is it for the benefit of the individual patient? Well, yes was the conclusion. So even if you have data that is not measured on or from the patient, it can still be for the benefit of the patient because it's used for clinical decision support in relation to the patient. Well, then the question is the intended purpose in the scope of the medical devices directive? So basically, is it therapeutic or diagnostic, to summarize it in a way that really does a lot of injustice to that definition, but we don't have enough time. And this is also important, really important to bear in mind, even if you fall out of the scope of that definition itself, then your device will still be an accessory if it helps another medical device to achieve its intended purpose. So, for example, if, well, let's say you have an accessory that helps to refine a particular